So this video is over photosynthesis. You will see a lot of similarities to cellular respiration, and I'll do a lot of comparison between the two because they are coupled reactions and they do go together. Here we go. So just like with cellular respiration, photosynthesis happens in a specific organelle in eukaryotic cells. So in a eukaryotic cell, photosynthesis is going to happen in the chloroplast. But in prokaryotic cells that are capable of photosynthesis, it happens in the plasma, membrane. Now, I want you to pay attention to this image that's on the screen. All of those little sections that are in yellow, they kind of read like yellow lines. That's the actual site of one of the two reactions taking place in photosynthesis. Now look at how many lines there are. That's showing you increased surface area. I have more places to do my reaction, which makes my reaction very efficient. I'm going to make a lot of whatever my product is because I have so many places to make it. Think of each little line as a factory almost, where if I only had one factory all making shoes, I can make lots of shoes, sure. But if I have an area the size of Dallas, all full of factories, all making the same shoe, then I have tons of shoes available. So what organisms do photosynthesis? We tend to think that it's only plants, but that's not true. So before we get to that, let's talk about what our two methods are of getting nutrients or food or energy if you are a living thing. So living things are either autotrophs or they're heterotrophs. So starting off with autotrophs, when you hear the word auto, I need you to think by itself. Okay, so like automatic. And troph is feed. So literally an autotroph produces food by itself, okay? And it's going to have energy in order to do that. And it's going to have to make some kind of organic molecule in order to do that from some sort of raw material. So autotrophs use energy to make organic materials, their own, please note. Okay, think of it as making it from scratch. And they use carbon dioxide and water to be able to do it. So there are two types of autotrophs. There are photoautotrophs. So where you see the word photo, you need to think photon, which is a light energy packet. Okay, so it's how light energy is packaged or transported. So photoautotrophs make their own organic compounds using light energy, and normally it's light in the form of sunlight, but it can also be lights in your house if they need to. Now, our classic examples of photoautotrophs are plants, cyanobacteria, and some protists. Not all protists are photosynthetic, so some. Heterotroph can't make their own food. Okay, they can't make their own food. They have to eat something else. So they consume, so eat, or they can break down or decompose organic molecules, and those organic molecules are going to come from other organisms. So when a lion hunts down a gazelle and eats it, the lion's a heterotroph. It's consuming the gazelle to get its organic molecules. When a tree dies and it rots away in an open field and eventually turns back into soil, you have bacteria and fungi that help to decompose that tree, and that's how they get their organic molecules. So here's the equation for photosynthesis. In photosynthesis, we are going to take carbon dioxide and water along with energy from the sun, and we're going to convert it into glucose and oxygen. Those parts and pieces should sound familiar because it's pretty much the opposite of what's happening in cellular respiration. So same parts and pieces, but we're going to use them differently. So in photosynthesis, carbon dioxide plus water with sun's energy produces glucose and oxygen. With cellular respiration, we're going to break down glucose with the aid of oxygen to create ATP, which is our energy. And at the end of it, we're going to make water and carbon dioxide. So the two reactions are the opposites of each other. So this is what a chloroplast looks like. This is the cartoon version of what a chloroplast looks like. And we're going to talk about some of the major parts and pieces here. So your chloroplast has two membranes, an inner membrane and an outer membrane. And those membranes don't touch. There is a space between them. That we call the intermembrane space. Now, on the inside of the inner membrane, you have two things. You have the liquid part of the chloroplast, which is called the stroma. And then you have all of these flat disc membrane structures. So each disc is called a thylakoid. Okay, when I take lots of discs and I stack them together, one on top of the next, the entire unit is called a granum. So it's one unit of multiple stacked thylakoids. Okay. Now, when I can talk about having sets of granum, and then I use the word grana. So this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 grana. So we use the term grana when it's more than one set of stacks. Okay. And then the thing that holds them together, that connects them to each other, like here, that's called your tubular lamella. Okay, and it just connects your sets of granums to each other. Now, the inside of the thylakoid is hollow, and that space is called the lumen. Okay, so again, one disc is a thylakoid. I have a set of thylakoids, one on top of the next, that's called a granum. And then when I have a set of granum, all together, they're called grana. Okay, so these are just the words that we pretty much went over for that picture. So again, we have an inner and an outer membrane. There is an intramembrane space or compartment between the two. The liquid on the inside of the inner membrane is known as the stroma. The thylakoid membranes are those individual flattened internal disc structures, and it's one of the places that one of our reactions in photosynthesis takes place. When I have a stack of membranes, when I have a stack of thylakoids together, just one stack is called a granum. When I have multiple stacks, they're called grana. And those grana are held together or connected by tubular lamella. And the inside of the thylakoid is hollow, and that space is known as the lumen. Okay, so I predominantly are going to find a lot of my chloroplast in my leaf, because my leaf is my structure that's adapted the best to being able to do two main things that are important to photosynthesis. My leaf is good at absorbing sunlight, and it allows the gases that I need to enter for photosynthesis to come in, but it also allows me to get rid of the gases produced in photosynthesis that I no longer need. Okay, so my leaf is structured in a way to be wonderful at absorbing sunlight, and it also allows for gases to come in and out of the leaf. Okay, so let's talk about the reactions. We're going to talk very generally, and then we'll talk more specifically later on. So there are 2 stages to photosynthesis. And in each of these stages, you're going to need to know all of the names, where it happens, what's being produced, okay? And also, like, what's helping, like, what am I starting off with in order to make my end product? So my first stage of photosynthesis is known as the light-dependent reactions. It can also be called cyclic photophosphorylation or non-cyclic photophosphorylation, depending on the circumstances. Some people just shorten all of that and call them the light reactions, but they're all referring to the same thing. So in the light-dependent reactions, I'm going to take energy from sunlight, and I'm going to use it to make ATP and NADPH. You know what ATP is. NADPH should be kind of familiar because you met a version of it in cellular respiration when we talked about NADH. So NADPH is an electron carrier. Now, light-dependent reactions happen in the thylakoid. And again, the end result is to make ATP and NADPH. Step 2 of the photosynthesis process is known as the light-independent reactions, or the Calvin cycle. And in this set of reactions, we're going to take that energy that we made or stored in ATP along with electrons from the NADPH, and we're going to use it to make a high energy sugar molecule. Normally it's glucose. So we use energy to build a sugar molecule. Okay, this is happening in the stroma. Remember that liquid part of the chloroplast? And again, we're going to use energy and available electrons to make glucose from carbon dioxide. So that's what's happening in those 2 major steps of photosynthesis. Okay, so this schematic just kind of goes over where everything is and what's happening in terms of the major players. So my light-dependent reactions happen in the thylakoid membrane, okay, or on the thylakoid membrane. So in the light-dependent reactions, I'm going to take in water, and I'm going to use energy and sunlight, and I am going to make ATP and NADPH. I also make some oxygen, but that oxygen, I'm not going to use it, so it leaves the leaf and enters our atmosphere. Now that ATP and NADPH, I'm going to go ahead and send those to my light-independent reactions, or the Calvin cycle. We're using carbon dioxide and the energy I've made and the electrons in the NADPH. I'm going to make sugar. And that's pretty much all of photosynthesis in a nutshell. So now let's look into more specifics. So we've mentioned a time or two that sunlight's vitally important for this process. We haven't talked about why. So light is a form of electromagnetic radiation, which means it carries energy. Now, how much energy it carries depends on what part of the light spectrum we are working with, because the different parts carry different amounts of energy. So if you look at the picture here are all of the colors in visible light, and these numbers refer to the wavelength of light. Okay, so the bigger the wavelength, the less energy it carries. The smaller the wavelength, the more energy it carries. So these guys have more energy here, less energy up here. So it's good that light carries energy, but you have to have a way to capture or harvest said energy. And this is what things that are photosynthetic are so very good at. So Visible light occurs, when I say visible, meaning light you can see, because we have lots of electromagnetic waves that we can't see. So visible light occurs from the 400 nanometer range, which is that purple violet kind of color, up to the 700 nanometer range, which is a red color. Photons are the units of energy carried by light. So that's where photosynthesis comes from. Like I said before, the shorter the wavelength, the greater the energy. So 400 nanometers, that purple area of light carries way more energy than the red area of light. Okay, that's all well and good. How does that help us? Well, we've mentioned photosynthesis. We know it happens in the leaf. We know it's happening specifically in the chloroplast. But there is a major player that we have not talked about yet, and that major player is something called a pigment. So pigments are molecules that are able to absorb specific or certain wavelengths of light. They can also transmit or reflect other wavelengths of light. So pigments do two things. They're on that visible spectrum of light, there's some colors that they're going to absorb the energy. There are other colors where they can't absorb it, so instead they will reflect it. Okay? Now, this is helpful because electrons in a pigment can absorb energy from the light, and it can change its own energy level. So an electron can go from ground state, which means it has very little energy, to excited, where it has a lot of energy. And when it's excited, we can use that energy to help us to power different processes. So we can use the energy to make things. Okay, now the electron carrier in photosynthesis is NADPH. Okay, and it is capable of carrying 2 electrons at a time. So, what are the pigments used for photosynthesis? Well, we have 2 types of chlorophyll, and then we have some other pigments known as carotenoids. Now, to be honest, these are not the only pigments, but these are the most important pigments. So chlorophyll, and it says chlorophylls because there are 2 kinds. There's chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. They are the major pigments involved in photosynthesis. And they're the ones that are found in your plants, in your green algae, and your cyanobacteria. You also have carotenoids, which, if you like carrots or sweet potatoes a lot, the reason that those vegetables are orange is because they contain a lot of the carotenoid pigment, okay? So carotenoids also absorb, but they don't absorb the same types of energy as your chlorophyll. So what this does is because the organism has both kinds, or because the plant might have both kinds, it expands how much different amounts of energy that plant can now absorb, because it has chlorophyll A and B that absorb in specific areas of the visible light spectrum, and then it also has carotenoids that absorb in specific areas of the visible light spectrum. Okay, so think of it as if you're saving for something. If you only saved your change, like after you broke $1 or $5 or whatever, if you only saved the coins, then yeah, you're saving some money and you'll be able to buy whatever it is you want to buy eventually. But if you save everything, your coins and your paper money, then you're saving even more than if you were just saving coins. So think of it this way. So let's look at where these guys absorb. Oops, sorry. So, starting off with chlorophyll A. Chlorophyll A is the solid line on this diagram. So, this line right here. Chlorophyll A absorbs in the following places. And I'm going to highlight that in pink. Okay, so we absorb in that purple and blue area a lot. Really, it's the purple area. We do a tiny bit of absorption in the orange area. And then we do a decent amount of absorption in the red area. Okay, so chlorophyll A absorbs in the blue and red. Now let's look at, let's show up, we'll see. I'm gonna let's try this yellow color. Maybe it'll show up, hopefully. Okay, so now let's look at chlorophyll B. Chlorophyll B is that dashed line. So it doesn't do as much absorption in the purple area. It absorbs a little bit, but not a ton. It does way more absorption in this blue-green area. Okay, and then not a lot in the true green section. It does a little bit of absorption in the yellow, and then some absorption in the orange. Okay, so chlorophyll B is more of a blue-green area, and then an orange-red area. Now my carotenoids don't absorb in quite as big a span, but it does absorb. Okay, so the carotenoids is the dotted line. Some absorption in the purple. Starts off slow, but it builds quickly. And then it does a good amount of absorption in the blue and like that sea greenish area. And then after that, it tanks. Okay, so by having all of these different places that these pigments absorb, your plant is effectively getting a lot of energy in this area of the spectrum. And then it's getting energy again in this area of the spectrum. Okay, so the only place that your plant isn't really getting any energy is in that 550 to 650 area. But every other part of the spectrum from 400 to 550, and then from 650 to 750, 700-ish, your plant's absorbing lots of energy, and it's because it has lots of different pigments, and all of the pigments are helping to absorb energy. Okay, so it's all well and good that these pigments can absorb the energy. It doesn't do us any good unless we can get them to electrons so that the electrons can be excited and then the electrons can move, and we can use that to make the ATP and stuff that we need to make. So how does your plant manage to do that? Well, it is going to use a set of systems called photosystems. So a photosystem is a large complex of light-absorbing pigments and proteins. And it's found in the thylakoid membrane, okay, which is why the light-dependent reactions happen in the thylakoid. The job of the photosystem is to absorb light and get it to where it needs to be. It increases how efficiently photosynthesis can happen. So your photosystem influences the efficiency of photosynthesis.